Pop quiz. What moves does this monster have? Some sort of slap? A tail whip? An airborne dive? A beam even? Chances are you've never hunted Urukodiora. And yet, it feels like those are movements and attacks it should have and do, right? Let's try the same thing in reverse. A call for backup, getting smacked in the face by a tail, a long-winded hip check. Which creature does that describe? It's all of these. These are at least one of you thought plenty of, and that means your attention span is cooked. Here's some Subway Surfer for you specifically. All of these are bird wyverns. In this video, I will prove that this feeling and knowledge is by design. These are the gameplay implications of species in Monster Hunter. First, let's talk about how we talk, just so we're all on the same page. Flying Wyvern, Neopteron, Leviathan, that's what I'll be referring to as the species of a monster. I'm not going with breed, because I've seen what you watch. Degenerates. Apex, Tempered, and yes, even Apex are classifications I will refer to as group. Both the species and the group of a monster can tell us a lot about them. What kind of attacks and behaviors we can expect, roughly when we'll start running into them, and sometimes even what kind of equipment they can provide. Note that we'll only cover large monsters today. With that out of the way, let's take a closer look to the not Plesioth example from earlier. These bird wyverns are all of the Great Drome type. Great Jaggy, Great Roggy, Velocidrome, that's why I call them the Great Dromes. All of them are early game monsters. Baby's first large monster hunt. All of them have the moveset of your typical local village drunkard. A bite, call for backup, tailspin, generally easy to exploit openings. But that's not all bird wyverns. Besides the great dromes, there's also the straight up birds. Kutku, Gypceros and Hypnocatrus are also early game monsters. Actual straight up birds tend to have a tailspin. A peck. A rushing forward move that usually has them fall over afterwards. And a projectile. Generally, this holds true for almost all the actual birds, from Kutku to Garuga, all the way up to Zenith Torridclas. Bird wyverns as a whole are usually early game monsters. They are very rarely introduced in mid or even late game. Monsters like Torridclas, young Garuga and Malfastio have some late and end game relevance, not because of their status as a bird wyvern, but in spite of it. That trait is shared with the Neopterons. The members of that species are Celtas, an early game monster, Celtas Queen, a mid game monster, and Atal'Kar, the singular most cinematic fight in Monster Hunter. Surely that means there's not a whole lot of similarities, right? Spoilers for Generations Ultimate. Front limb swipe? Check. Some dash type move. Check. Shinji get in the Ava. Weird, but check. It's hard to say what is and isn't a trait of the Neopteron species. They have 3 large monster members, which are early game, smack dab mid game, and the literal final boss. That said, it's also hard to say what is and isn't a trait of a species that has 36 members, excluding their sub, rare, variant, and whatever other subsets. Yes, this is about Flying Wyverns, how could you tell? Flying Wyverns are everywhere. You have the Kezus and the Bazarioses and the Monoblosses and the Acanthus of the world. No, not that world. And it's ostensibly difficult to find things that apply to all of them. Somehow, there still are things shared across a notable number of the Flying Wyvern species. Kezu and Giginox both heavily utilize close-range discharge type moves. Close-range discharges are also staple moves of Gravios. Modern Astalos, Beru, and arguably even Tigrex if you consider his Raw as one. All of those, and many more, also have some form of ranged attack. Spits, beams, orbs, rocks, generally ranged stuff you can avoid by walking left. More uniquely, Kezu and Giginox both have long-range bites, which is vaguely similar to how Arcwild attacks with his chains. Nagakuga's Tail Snap falls into this category of move too. Most Flying Wyverns have the tried and true Tailspin, and every large monster of this species has a Roar. Except Pariapuria. Except Musu Pariapuria. I think there's a general stack of basic moves most of these guys have. Projectiles, a long-range physical attack, Tailspin, a rush, run, dash type attack, Roar, a lunge or pounce. Flying Wyverns often seem deliberately designed so that their dangerous and predominant moves are reflected in how they look. Look at Steve. Its biggest threats to hunters are bleeding, vicious lag attacks, and flying patterns. The Bloss's horns, Arcweld's chains, Tigrex's face, Acanthus and Ukandos' sheer size, Nagakuga's wing blades and tail. Those are often telltale signs of what kind of moves to be scared of, and regularly, but not always, where to focus our own attacks. Piscine Wyverns are much clearer in contrast. Every single large member of this group has a flop. A tailspin, a hip check, a projectile, often in the form of a spit or a beam, every single one of them, except Beotodus. What a special little guy. All of them can also go under water, where water is used very loosely. Beotodus goes under snow, Lavazioth goes under lava, Cephadrome goes under sand, and the Ganos duo can go under tower. I'm really not one for the lore of Monster Hunter, but if you are, that should already tell you where this duo ranks in terms of power level. Cephadrome, Beotodus and Giratodus are early game hunts at their base. Plesioth is more of a mid-game situation, although he has been spotted in early game in some titles. The Ganos duo fall under the metal category of species and are supremacies. We'll get to what that means soon, so for now I have this actual 100% real promotional poster. Generally speaking, Piss Wyvern legs are a great target to attack, because they're easy to reach and that can make for easier topples. The only exception to this is Leviathan in exactly world. Yes, that world. Fanged beasts, or for the old hells, Pelagussi, are another difficult species. Plangonga, Kongalala, Rajang, Bishaten, Garangorm, the monkeys, share obvious similarities. They punch and claw at things. They usually have projectiles ranging from throwing fruit to beams and explosions. Monkeys often have a strong close-range slam, and a big leap. Azuros, Volvidon and Lagombi also belong to this species. Volvidon and Lagombi both have access to long-range moves. All three of them can attack behind them without turning around. And all three have at least one consecutive swipe combo. Gammoth and Buldrome are also part of this species, but share very little with the others. Frontier's Garons are also in this group, and even share some similarities. Much like Gammoth and Buldrome though, it's not enough to make that connection, and they're much more closely related to Odogaron, which itself is not a fanged beast. Placement-wise, they're all over the place. Azuros, Kongalala and Doshaguma are very much early game hunts. Ajarakan and Garangolm are more mid-game relevant, and Rajang places firmly in endgame territory. Usually. I'm not going to do the impression. I will talk about the Leviathan problem though. Almost all Leviathans are long, fast, painful, and visually imposing. Swipes, slaps, and bites. Are their general low impact close range moves. All of them have some form of rush or dash. And they're generally good at using their large bodies in very aggressive and painful ways. Nibelsnarf, Royal Ludroth, Somnakant, Balahara and Pokarodon are relatively chill early game monsters. They are mostly free of the usual pain points, assuming they don't have ungodly amounts of health. Sunbreak. The mid and late game creatures, however, Agnaktor, Lagaicrus, Almudron, Ufduna and Shindahat, are all way too fast for how huge they are. Close range AoE or area of effect attacks, forward slides, belly flops, beams and projectiles are staples to the big Leviathan's moveset. Leviathans are easy to read, but make it consistently difficult to respond to them. They are also the one species of large monsters where extra iframes are not the answer. Because of their sheer size, lingering hurt boxes and the unforgiving spam of area denial, evasion, or evade window in modern games, is not the best choice of countermeasure. Interestingly, one of the hardest mats to get off of the mid or late game Leviathans traditionally has been the claws. In my opinion, I wouldn't have it any other way. I found myself frustrated with them every time I played a non-shield weapon in older games. Being given the choice to either get really good at a problematic matchup or pick up and learn a new weapon type very much shaped the way I interact with Monster Hunter to this day. Thank you, Leviathans. Brood Wyverns are a pretty diverse bunch. There's Barroth and Duramboros, Brachydios and Glavenus. There's some obvious visual similarities, featherless bipeds and all. That Chematris breaks because it has feathers. In this business, we call that a backstab. If we ignore the smaller members of this group, so Chematris and Rampopolo, the connecting factor is the hard-committing, momentum-based attack patterns. Uragan's chin slam and roll, Barroth's head-first rush, Duramboros' self-yeet, Brachydios' jump. Brood Wyverns are the best at telling on themselves. There's this baseline that they all meet in terms of design. Usually, if something deviates from that baseline, that's the thing the moveset will be focused on. Uragan's chin, Barroth's head, Duramboros and Glavenus' tails, Brachydios' forelegs, Banbaros' antlers and size. All of those define the main combat strategy of those monsters, the main attacks they will use and what their scariest bits are. But also offer targets for us to focus on, and breaking those parts usually makes the hunt easier in some fashion. Some very rare times, the scary part is not obvious. Whenever the scary part is not obvious, they are the scary part. I am the hype! Not all of the classifications allow us that level of insight. Snake Wyverns currently contain exactly Najarala, Demi-Elder covers exactly Gore Magala, Amphibians are 3 frogs and a blow-up shark, Fanged Wyverns are mostly early game little guys or bait for fan art. Everything we discussed so far has been true for almost every species of monster. Every hunter that's touched more than one Monster Hunter title is aware of this at some level. There is not one, but 2 special species where this is not true. The first of which are Elder Dragons. Many Elders are Elders because they don't really fit anywhere else. Lao Shan Lung, Fatalis, Yomama Tsukami. It's clear on first sight that these are something different than your average run-of-the-mill Flying Wyvern. Within the Elder Dragon species, there are a few that do however belong together. Kushala Daora, Chameleos, and Teostra are often referred to as the Elder Trio for a reason. They share the same gimmick, namely their aura, very late head breaks, and even a lot of moves like the slap or the tail swipe. Ruko Diora, Lunastra, and Garuba Diora not only look similar, but behave similarly too. But if we look at some other members of the Elder Dragon species, Namiel, Shara Ishvalda, and Nakakos, they look and behave completely differently. There is an even secreter secret to this. It is not actually the species classification that determines a monster's moveset and behavior, but if it doesn't, then what does? It's a skeleton. The elder trio shares a skeleton, and so do many other members of other different species. Skeletons are often, let's call it, reserved to a type of species. This skeleton sharing leads to the familiar feeling to many default attacks that we've been talking about. It's not just attacks either. Many hitbox oddities and even topples can be traced back to the very literal skeleton of a monster. You can reasonably make the assumption that it's genius design by the Monster Hunter team, that making us hunters intuitively understand these things is a genius design choice. But it's not. It's not a genius design choice, simply because it's an even geniuser design choice, because from our very first large monster hunt onwards, we are conditioned to see these things. We were so conditioned to it that many hunters can't even express this relation anymore, because it's so ingrained to them that it just feels natural. You get hit by a great jaggy body check, and are immediately aware that everything shaped like this threatens to have such a move. If you learn how to deal with that attack, you automatically also learn how to deal with the most painful move of a whole subset of monsters, regardless of the layers of paint put on them. In return, this allows for a much more complex design for other monsters' patterns and combos, because the fundamentals already feel natural. That just leaves one interesting species introduced in wilds: constructs. I have nothing here. I don't care much about the lore, and lore is the reason these guys are classified like that. The species of constructs is composed of Zoshia and the Guardian monsters. That is something with interesting implications. The Guardians, I mean. Guardians are almost entirely separate from their non-Guardian counterparts. They may look like recolors, but they have a bunch of additions to their moveset. Guardians behave like normal monsters at the start of the hunt. Their enraged behaves like an empowered state. Being enraged really unlocks these new additions, wilk-based attacks. In turn, that translates to mostly delayed or very large explosions. You can think of them like the arc-tempered Raydao aftershocks or Teostra's powder moves. Because their enrage is basically an empowered state, they can be knocked out of it by dealing enough damage to them. Losing their empowered state also means they lose their wilk-based attacks, and they can't regain them until they change areas and charge up again. Guardians also cannot enter the exhausted or drooling state. Once they start charging up, they cannot be interrupted. So no traps, disruptive status effects or topples will work, and they cannot be slain during the charge up. Charging up like this clears all their wounds and enables them to re-enter their empowered state. Guardians were introduced in wilds, can be trapped, captured, and have their own materials and equipment. So for all intents and purposes, they are their own monsters. But Mr. Newsman guy, I hear you say, what about Frenzied, Furious, Anomaly, Savage Risen, Orange, Dingeldongler, the 12th? To which I say, yes, what about it? Let's pick it apart. This indicates a subspecies. Because we are agnostic to lore, subspecies, rare species, variants, and deviants can all be lumped together. All of them are new versions of existing monsters. Sub, rare, and deviants all have their own equipment, their own icon, and are their own thing. All of them can be thought of as monster, but Nagakuga, but it stuns and is green. Legiacrus, but on land. Kutku, but it's blue. Raphalos, but the head is really hard. Diablos, but it also explodes you. They almost always have some extra moves and longer combo strings. Often, the extra fluff around certain moves are designed to punish hunters for trying to exploit an opening the base version had. That probably sounded very theoretical, so allow me to make it practical. Try Ultimate's Raphalos has this bite. It is very easy to see in advance, position for, and punish. Azure Raphalos has an airborne version of that bite. It is still easy to see in advance, position for, and get punished. Azure Loss gains a small fire area for this bite specifically, and this punishes hunters who thought that it's an easy opening. Neat. Variants are slightly different. They did not have their own icon until modern titles, and regularly didn't have their own equipment or weapons. Instead, their material was used to upgrade the base species equipment. In modern games, they finally got to have their own gear. The typical difficulty curve goes monster, subspecies, the rest. Rare species like White Espinas or Lucent Nagakuga can completely mess up an unexpecting hunter. Furious Rajang and Rusted Kushala can fall under variant too, but I don't think I need to explain how these are not equivalent. The classification of variant is also shared by Primordial Malzeno, Risen Crimson Glow Valstrax, Rune Nergigante, and Shrieking Legiana, according to some wikis at least. Deviants were introduced by name and mechanic in Generations. They are very reminiscent of Frontier. Special tickets are required to even attempt to hunt these guys. Their weapons fill the hunter art gauge faster than normal weaponry, and none of their armor has slots. Instead, they provide a signature compound skill each. Silverwind Nagakuga, for example, provides Silverwind Soul, which is a combo skill of Evasion +2, Critical Eye +3 and Sneak. In a modern environment, that would be 5 points of Evade window and 30% unconditional affinity and Sneak. Lol. Special species are limited to Monster Hunter Explore, and that thing's dead unfold. Hardcore monsters are Frontier exclusive variations of monsters. When picking a quest from the quest board, you can usually select whether you want to face the normal or the hardcore variation. This choice is unlocked in high rank. They look slightly different, have slightly different sounds and music. They also have much bigger damage, health and resistances to status. Hardcore monsters can be captured, but traps last extremely short on them, which makes it a combined effort to actually capture them. Notably, they don't have their own materials, except a monster-specific rare carve. Since that rare can only ever be carved, you'd also shoot yourself in the foot by capturing it. These rares were used in a wide range of armor and weapons, but have fallen out of use a bit ever since G-Rank and Zeniths made their debut. Hardcore monsters otherwise don't have their own sets or weapons. Hardcore quests, however, reward monster-agnostic items, which you can think of as tickets. These tickets are part of the Hedon grind, which results in decorations for the strongest weapon-specific skills in Frontier. This way, they've managed to stay relevant for a long time. UL, or unlimited monsters, are unlocked at capped G-Rank. They were a major part of the endgame grind in Frontier at the end of its official update cycle. Unlimited hunts also don't have their own material or equipment, but reward sigil materials. Sigils are Frontier's RNG grind, but are a whole thing to get into. Think of them like super-powered weapon-exclusive RNG decorations. If you want to know more, check for the G-Rank Frontier videos once they're out or drop by on one of my Frontier streams. ULs are mostly equivalent to hardcore monsters in that they have massively bigger stats than their standard counterparts. Everything they do is dangerous and serious, and most of them have maxed health and big defense modifiers. Simplified, that means long hunts. They're basically the equivalent of Sunbreak special investigations, except you actually get something out of them. Zenith monsters are their own thing yet again. Basically, Zeniths are their own tier beyond G or Master rank. With that new tier, they also have a higher level of hazards. Extreme Blights are, befitting the name, extreme. They require 55 elemental resistance to be prevented. Extreme or Zenith statuses, I'm going to use those interchangeably, are incredibly dangerous and hard to play around. Poison scales with Zenith tier and can only be cleared with items those Zeniths drop as shiny drops. Paralysis will not immobilize you immediately, but instead linger and occasionally proc an animation that interrupts anything you're currently doing, including rolling. Extreme Sleep. Shut your mouth, lay down and don't move for about 8 hours. I said we'd go through the gameplay implications, so please stick with me for a moment here. Zeniths all have their own mats and gear. All Zenith armor pieces provide skill points, much the same way Ultran armor did. On top of that, they also provide a skill up. Let's start with the most complicated. Skill slot up. Skill slot up increases how many skills you can have active at once. This will be on almost every relevant endgame set in Frontier, because Frontier limits how many skills can be active at once. If you reach the required point threshold for more skills than you can have active, other skills will be disabled, even though they should be active. The sole deciding factor which skills get to be active and which get deactivated is the unique internal ID number. Skill slot up does exactly what it says on the tin. It increases the amount of active skills you can have by 1 for each piece of gear you have equipped with skill slot up. All other Zenith skills increase the level of a skill you have active. Vampirism up, for example, will take your vampirism skill from level 1 to level 2. Don't worry about what vampirism does. I'm just using it to show you how skill up works. It will not grant vampirism 1 if you do not have vamp at all. Vampirism is a 2-tier skill. So what happens when you use vamp up while you have vampirism 2 already? Vampirism 3. Every skill up affected skill can go even further beyond and unlock a level otherwise unobtainable. Skill up skills also apply to skills that are part of compound skills. On the weapons side, all Zenith weapons make breaking Zenith parts easier. Zenith parts are the centerpieces of these guys, so to speak. Breaking them strips them of their ability to use certain moves. It also downgrades some of their hazards like roars and wind pressure, and sometimes drastically changes the fight. Usually, Zeniths with their Zenith part broken are much easier. To balance that, these Zenith parts have unholy amounts of health. Some of them, like Baru Ragaru, you can almost slay by just focusing on their head and only achieve the break a few combos before they die. Zenith weapons make that part break significantly easier. From a non-Frontier perspective, you can think of them as Frontier's versions of Generation's deviants. Zeniths can be trapped, but cannot be captured. Whew. On to more familiar grounds. Tempered monsters are beefed up versions of their base monster. They have bigger HP, are harder to make a status stick to, and have higher damage output. They don't have their own materials, except an Iceborne's guiding lance, and don't have their own equipment. The main purpose for hunting these are either RNG rewards, namely streamstones for weapon augments in base world, augment and upgrade materials in Iceborne's guiding lance, decorations in both world and wilds, and additionally talisman and Archon parts also in wilds. In wilds, they also have a more direct in-hunt mechanic. Tempered monsters can have tempered wounds, which appear later than normal wounds, are blue, last longer, and usually provide a topple when they're broken. Arch-tempered monsters are the upgraded version of tempered monsters. They don't have their own materials or weapons, but hunting them provides tickets, which are used in crafting their armor. Tempered monsters are mostly the same thing as their normal versions, just more painful and bulky. Arch-tempered monsters, on the other hand, expand their base moveset, often have extended combo strings, some new moves, and sometimes new mechanics and interactions. Their sets are typically the power creep of the games they are in. AT hunts are typically the most difficult things in their respective games, relatively speaking. Hyper monsters are very unique in what they do. They're the only type of hunt that toys with attack speed in both directions, instead of just generally making a monster faster. Hypers have glowing spots on them that wander around their bodies during the hunt. Attacks that originate from the glowing part can come out either sped up or slowed down, and regardless of which, hurt a lot more than normal. Hitting the glowing body part, however, grants more hunter art gauge than normal, which offers a risk-reward factor to targeting those parts. Hypers mostly keep their base moveset and cannot enter exhausted state. These guys have their own mats and armor, but not weapons. Many weapons require the material of the hyper monster they're based on instead. So for a simplified example, a Rathalos wax would require hyper Rathalos mats to fully upgrade. Frenzied monsters can inflict, well, frenzy. Attacking monsters enough will clear it and provide affinity, exactly like Gore's Frenzy or Bloodlust would. In return for that extra damage you could be doing, frenzied monsters have more health and deal more damage. Due to wilds, I should specify, Monster Hunter 4's frenzied monsters behave like that. Those frenzied monsters enrage faster and have new attacks, but also exhaust faster. Their frenzied state is also an empowered state, so you can topple them out of it by dealing enough damage. Frenzied monsters interact with 4-use Y-stone systems, allowing for even more extra damage. Frenzied monsters grant species-agnostic materials. Wild's version of frenzied monsters keep the ability of inflicting frenzy, but is regionally limited to the cold area at the time of writing. They also, for some reason, have like no health whatsoever, so much so that many people were convinced that that was a bug. 4U apexes, or frenzied apexes, are the logical maximum of frenzied monsters. Similar to Frenzied monsters, these guys interact with Y-stones in almost the same way. While they are in their apex state and there are no active Y-stones, pretty much every attack will bounce. Active Y-stones prevent that, on top of their normal effect. Frenzied apexes are very strong and high-end difficulty fights in for you. They also provide species-agnostic materials, some of which are necessary for weapon honing. Weapon honing works similar to World's weapon augments for the 5ers amongst you. For the 6ers, weapon honing augments and all those systems give a weapon more base stats. Usually you can make the choice which stats are boosted. The 4th generation technically introduced a pretty bad version of health augment through the system too. On to something completely different. Apexes don't have their own material, so no weapons or gear either. 1 second, this gets too confusing otherwise. Apexes do have one special item that is specific to them, which is used for certain important decorations like crit boost and wax. In Rise. In Hunt, if an apex monster enrages, every other large monster in close proximity will also enrage. This enrage state is also, like most other multi-monster spanning gimmicks, an empowered state, with all that entails. They're generally more aggressive, faster and more flashy than their non-apex counterparts, with extra moves and longer combo strings. While they were current content, they were often compared to the deviant versions from Generation's Ultimate because of the alleged similarities, but I'm not going to go that deep today. Apexes cannot be captured or mounted. Afflicted monsters are a Sunbreak edition. They don't have equipment of any kind, but provide somewhat monster-agnostic material. Those materials are used for many final stage upgrades of many weapon trees, as well as Sunbreak's equivalent to the weapon augment systems from previous games. Additionally, they find use in gambling. Afflicted monsters cannot be captured. On a physical hit, they inflict Blood Blight. Blood Blight is a debuff that lowers the efficiency of healing items, but it also acts as a lifesteal effect, healing you back for a portion of the damage you deal. Once they enrage, orbs start spawning on them. Attack those orbs enough and they will explode, dealing about 1.2% of their maximum health. The afflicted enrage state is also an empowered state. Deal damage, get topple, you get it by now. Unlike most other empowered states, however, toppling an afflicted monster will immediately send it to a time-based exhausted state. During that time, they cannot re-enrage. These guys can't be captured. Afflicted monsters mostly keep their base moveset and only in some cases gain an extra move or combo string. Anomaly investigations, so the endgame system quests these monsters appear in, have levels to them, ranging from 1 to 300, and a special investigation after that. Each level comes with its own modifier to health and damage, so the equation is higher level equals harder hunt. On paper. The last notable thing about Afflicteds is that they scale with the quest timer. Anomaly investigations are randomly generated and can have the timer go as low as 25 minutes for single targets and 30 minutes for 2. The lower the timer, the lower the health of the target. Neat. Elder Dragons cannot be afflicted. Instead, they become risen. Much like Deviants and Apexes before them, Risen Elders provide tickets as rewards. These are used to craft their respective armor pieces, but they don't have weapons. They also kind of have their own materials for the augmenting system, much like afflicted monsters, but those are not used for anything except augments and gambling. Risen Elders expand on their base form's moveset, much like almost everything else on this list. What sets them apart is that they have an additional tier above them called Hazard. Hazard Risen Elder quests are usually just done for the extra challenge, except during anomaly investigations, where they gain that status automatically after a certain level. Both the normal Risen Geysers as well as the Hazard variants have different moves and combo strings than their respective base versions. Risen Elders are unbelievably aggressive and make for some of the hardest hunts in the entire franchise, for now. Their empowered state is called the Risen State. Damage, topple. Unlike afflicted monsters, however, they do not have a cooldown period. Risen Shaggy in particular is infamous for getting toppled out of his risen state only to immediately re-enter it. Speaking of difficulty, the singular hardest group of monsters are the Frontier exclusive Musus. They are usually translated to extreme monsters or peerless individuals. God, that name fucks. Much like many other endgame relevant groupings, Musos reward tickets. These are predominantly used for decorations, with some of the best ones locked behind them. Granted, there isn't any content that's harder than Musos yet, so any extra power you could gain is probably used on exactly Musos. Usually, peerless monsters have two types of quest. You can repel them, or lesser slay, on a 20-minute timer, where they have less health for fewer rewards, or you can attempt a true slay. True slay quests have much more health, and you usually have all of 10 minutes to clear them, start to finish. Supremacies can provide you with an equally bad day. They have some unique materials, which are used in a wide variety of equipment. If that sounds similar to hardcore monsters, that's because it is. Supremacies are the logical maximum of hardcore monsters. Well, were. Unlimiteds might have a claim to that title too. They mostly look normal. Below that surface, however, they only really share the absolute baseline moves with their baseline species. Supremacies are usually the singular biggest wall in frontier progression. You heard that right. Progression. To put this in mainline perspective, imagine Wilds DLC came out and introduced Master Rank. There's this whole Hunter Rank grind that unlocks arch-tempered monsters and such, but Capcom wouldn't want newcomers to be cut off from playing the current content with their friends, right? Supremacies in a mainline perspective would be taking Arch-Tempered Archveld, giving it significantly more health, and then making it a required quest right after finding Wyveria. Burst and Origin species probably have some lore reasons for being what they are, but in gameplay, they're pretty much just their own monsters, complete with their own materials, armor, and weapons. Origin species weapons do have an additional effect. When maxed out to their G-rank version, they grant an additional skill that ignores the normal skill cap. Origin species and Teostra for some reason. Neither Burst nor Origin species can be captured. They are immune to traps. There are two more unofficial but mechanically relevant groupings. Gosho monsters generally provide generic material. This is probably what Sunbreak's Anomaly system is based on. Certain armor from Frontier's Hunter Rank 5 and 6 also has the effect that, if brought to a Hunter Rank 5 or 6 quest, and while your HP is at or above a certain threshold, all currently active skills gain an extra level. Sheetan, or Conquest War monsters as they are allegedly translated, are somewhat similar to the Anomaly systems. There are a few tiers of increasing difficulty to them, and they provide mostly ticket items, which are used for some, at the time, probably relevant equipment upgrades. Generally, Sheetan above level 300 can rival some of the higher grade Zeniths in terms of difficulty. Don't be fooled. These do not need grinding to level up or anything like that. It's just a weird naming convention for their tiers. Level 1 for the first stage, level 300 for the second, level 1000 for the third, and level 9999 for the fourth. And now is the time where I ask you, what's your favorite endgame relevant monster group? Let me know in the comments. Like and share this video with a friend. If you want to support what I do, you can do so by becoming a Patreon, or by watching one of these videos next. Special and ginormous thank yous to Jay and Retro, who helped me get a total of 31 hours of footage for this video, and thank you for watching. Now if you'll excuse me, I have to explode.